this link. We're sorry about like any confusion that may have been caused. So the first talk was a great success, and we're sure that it's just going to keep getting better. So our second speaker for today is Dr. Ritinder Sindhu, who, as you all know, is one of the best professors in the CS department at PS University. Sindhu sir will be talking about framework for efficient logic design. He has more than 10 years of experience working in the industry and a great many years of research experience. Sir has published numerous papers and written a book called Efficient Computation Using Self Reconfiguration. The theme of his work has been to achieve efficient computation by innovations based on a strong theoretical foundation. His specific areas of interest include reconfigurable computing, logic design, automata theory, and parallel processing. Sidhu sir is also the co-founder of the Hack Club at PES University. I'm sure you guys would have seen the poster for Hack all over the PESU app. And right. So yeah. So his current area of focus is hardware accelerated matrix multiplication to accelerate machine learning applications. Right. So over to you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. We were so honored when you accepted our invitation. And yeah.
Oh, thank you so much for that great introduction. And like I said, I'm happy to be here. So, am I audible? Is my volume
Yes,
level
sir.
okay?
Your audio is
Okay,
perfect.
fine. Thank you. So, I am, a great fan of open source, and I was happy to see. I was not aware of this, and when Madhav contacted me, I was happy to see that there is this open source club here, and there are students who appreciate and encourage free and open source software. And so personally, when I was a student at ISC, there was this conference where Richard Stallman had come down, and at that time I wasn't too aware of what open source is all about. And so it was quite inspiring to meet him and talk to him and understand how he views the world. And so that's where I kind of got started, got interested in free and open source software. And it has a great impact on the world today, and good to see that all of you are also interested in that.
Thank you, sir. We're so happy to hear that. And yeah, this is our first open hardware event, but hopefully it definitely won't be the last.
I hope so as well. So, like Ishita mentioned, I work more on what one might call hardware implementation of algorithms. And so I'll go ahead and start by telling you why it is that, I'm kind of interested in this area. Whereas, today there is a lot of emphasis on the software aspect of things. So you might have got some idea from, the talk by Kunal Ghosh earlier that there's going to be need for chip designers and stuff. So I'd like to get started by giving you a better idea of why that is likely to be the case. So that'll be the first part of my talk. And in the second part, I am going to introduce a framework that I've developed over a certain number of years for my own personal logic design projects in industry as well as in academia. And this is something that we are shortly going to share with PESU students in the workshop, that Ishita was mentioning, you might have seen on PESU app. And long term, well, not too long term, hopefully in a reasonably short amount of time, we'll go ahead and open source it. And we have plans of, putting that entire framework on GitHub so that, we want to make it reach a certain level of minimum polish, shall we say, before we go ahead and open source it out, right? But that is definitely the plan. Um, so let me get started by Let's see. Give me a second. I'll just share my screen here. Okay, looks like I'll have to share my whole screen. But fine. So not sure why it's not sharing this. Hold on.
So is there any issue while sharing the screen?
Yeah, so um, the window I wanted to share didn't come up, and then when I tried the entire screen, it was not allowing. It's saying you must grant permission in order to screen share.
So that time you had shared. Could you please leave the meeting and rejoin? I think that might work.
Okay, fine. All right, let me do that. Thanks.
So sorry for the delay, guys.
Can I see my screen or not?
Sir, I think I got it. Could you try now?
Okay.
No, wait. Okay. Could you try now?
Okay, done. Thanks.
No, sir. I don't think we can see your screen.
Yeah,
It
so
should
we
come up, I think.
see it.
Let's wait.
Can anyone see it?
Not yet, sir.
Not yet, sir.
So maybe it could be with the permissions. Can you check like the padlock icon next to the URL bar? It'll show what all permissions have been allowed to Google Meet.
Okay. Yeah, share screen is allowed. So, not sure what the issue is.
Yes, sir. It's visible.
Yes, sir, it's visible
Yeah,
now.
it's working now.
Thank you.
Hello.
Sir?
Ah,
Okay, hopefully it should work this time, right? It worked once. So before you left, the screen was visible.
Oh, is it? Okay,
Yeah,
sounds good.
yeah.
So was that a window or?
It was your entire screen, I think.
Oh, okay. How about now?
Yes, sir. We can see the
Yeah,
screen.
now it's
Great.
just your window.
Fine. All right. So let's go through Emacs then. I'll share my slides also through here. I think that should be doable. Um, okay, it's going to be in reverse video. Great. All right. But I think that'll work. Can everyone see this first title slide?
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Okay, great. So, right. So, like I was saying, there's this framework that has been developed. So I'll be talking about that in the second half. But let me get started by, digging a bit deeper into why it is that this hardware implementation of algorithms and chip design and the other things that previous speaker was talking about, why they are likely to be more important for all of you when you graduate and go out and get into industry and academia. So let's look at little bit of so what is going on, right? So some years back, Intel bought this company called Altera, which is a company that makes these devices called FPGAs, right? Some of you may have heard it. Many of you may now not have heard it. That's not a problem. So essentially, FPGA stand for Field Programmable Gate Arrays, and they bought it for $17 billion, right? And Google developed, you are probably all familiar with TensorFlow, which is their software for doing machine learning and stuff. But they also make something called tensor processing units, which is chip design hardware. So that Google has developed for accelerating AI/ML processing, right? So it seems a bit weird. A company like Google that one never associates with hardware has not only developed a chip of their own, and they could have outsourced it to Intel or Qualcomm or someone, but they took the trouble of hiring people to develop, do the chip design within Google itself. A few weeks back, similar things happened. So there were two FPGA companies, Altera, which was bought by Intel, the other was Xilinx, which was bought by AMD just a few weeks back for $35 billion this time, right? And there was this announcement that Amazon, for their uh, speaker-based appliances that they have, for doing all the AI processing of that, obviously that happens in the Amazon cloud. But doing it on microprocessors was not fast enough, so Amazon has also taken the trouble of designing their own AI/ML acceleration chip, which they call Inferentia. They're so new that there's not much technical information about it out there. So what is going on here, right? So why is it that established CPU companies like Intel and AMD are buying these, FPGA companies, so-called, whatever FPGAs might be, and why is it that software companies are taking the trouble of designing hardware, right? And what impact, if any, it might have on your careers, right? So let's get started by, so this is a die photograph of a typical microprocessor. Okay. Um, this is a few years old, but if you look at a newer one, nothing much has changed, except the problem that I'm going to talk about has become worse, right? So what is the problem? So if you look at it, so think about what is it that in a microprocessor it is that does the useful part of the computation, right? So uh, it would make sense to say that it's a reasonable claim to make that it's the arithmetic and logic unit of a microprocessor that actually does the useful work, right? That's where the actual computations happen, right? So here, it's the in the left side, in the center, you see that integer data path and scheduler, right? So that is the part of the microprocessor which is which is essentially the ALU, right? So that plus if you're doing floating point computations, Then there's a section below at the bottom, which is labeled floating point unit. So those are the parts that do the useful computation, right? So what you see on the right side is this huge 2 megabyte level 2 cache, right? And on the left side, somewhere squeezed in, this probably level 1 cache. And then your instruction decoder and branch predictor, right? On the top right, you see that 64K L1 cache. And below that also, there's another L1 cache. Then you have load store units, which kind of schedule the memory accesses or cache accesses and take care of hits and misses and stuff like that. So basic point is that, it's about 15% of the area of this, which is actually, or maybe 20% barely, which is actually doing the useful work. And the rest of the chip is just there to kind of feed the instructions into this arithmetic and logic unit for integers and floating point numbers, right? So the interesting thing is, if you go way back and look at the die photograph of a chip, say 20, 30, 40 years back, you'll find that the ALU took a lot bigger fraction of the area of the chip. All right. So effectively, the number of transistors that the ALU is consuming is increasing, but the amount of chip area that the ALU is consuming is decreasing as time goes by. And why is that? That is because, so, if you want to go to details, you can Google things like von Neumann bottleneck. That's spelled VONNEUMANN. But the basic point is that, to keep that ALU busy, you need bigger and bigger caches and bigger branch predictors and all that, right? So because of that, why is this? This is actually an inherent problem with the CPU architecture that we all use, right? That is not something that Intel and AMD is going to talk about, obviously. And that is not something that most people were interested in talking about so far. And the reason was because of something called Moore's law. The performance of this kept on increasing even though the architecture itself had some inherent problems. So, there was not a whole lot of incentive in fixing those problems, right? So much software, compilers, languages, infrastructure was developed and people were invested in that. And because you were getting performance gains, no one was, interested in fixing the problem. And why were we getting performance gains? So we were getting performance gains because of something called Moore's law. Okay. So this is an observation made once upon a time, I believe in the 1960s, that the number of transistors in a integrated circuit doubles about every 2 years or 18 months, right? Around 1.5 years. So obviously they don't double automatically, right? They don't just sort of grow there. It is because, scientists and physicists keep working on developing newer fab processes and stuff. And the cadence of that sort of has been such that, every 2 years or so, the number of transistors, basically the transistor size, you can reduce its size by around 50%, right? So that has been happening every about 2 years. So this is kind of unprecedented, not only in the history of science and technology, but history in general, right? So because typically you have, trade-offs, you have a win-lose situation. Here you have a win-win-win situation. Let me talk about that. So basically number of transistors doubles. What it means is that the size of a transistor reduces by half. When that happens, the speed of the transistors, because its size has reduced to half, doubles, right? So the transistor speed has doubled. And again, because its size has reduced by half, the power consumption of each transistor also reduces by half, right? So because of that, what has been happening is number of transistors has been doubling, speed of the transistors has also been doubling, and their power consumption has been reducing by half, right? So it's a win-win-win situation. And it has been going on every 2 years. This doubling performance has been happening ever since, I would say, the early 60s, right? So for the last, around, what is that, 40, 60 years or so, this doubling has been happening, right? And so just imagine, the amount of computation power that we have today because of Moore's law, right? So just to give you an idea of that, On the left, what you see is a supercomputer called the Cray XMP that was developed in 1986. Okay, and so around that time, India actually bought a somewhat smaller version of this, and the US government was not ready to give it to us because they said you'll use it to develop missiles and stuff like that. And so it required like water cooling, and it was like 6-7 feet tall, as you can see in the picture on the left, and it cost $15 million, right? So today you can buy a device for 15,000 rupees that is thousands of, well, at least hundreds of times faster than that Cray machine you see on the left, right? And it costs 15,000 rupees, and the device is something that we all typically have in our pockets. That's a smartphone, right? So our smartphones are actually more powerful and capable than supercomputers of the past, right? Why is that? It is there because of Moore's law, right? Because of the doubling that has happened, we can make CPUs that are so power efficient and so fast that they are way more capable than supercomputers of the past, right? So this illustrates why so someone you might have seen people have said that if the same kind of Moore's law kind of doubling happened in the automotive industry, right, then you would have a vehicle like a Rolls Royce which would go like couple of times around the earth on um, 2 drops of petrol, and you could buy a Rolls Royce for around 20 rupees or something like that, right? So that is the impact that Moore's law has had, and that is the reason why the weaknesses of microprocessor architectures are something that people have not bothered about so far, right? Okay, but now what is happening is that Moore's law is slowing down, right? So there are some people who say that it's kind of grinded to a halt, but there are some, so the consensus is that, if it's not stopped, it is at least slowing down. So Intel will, tell you that it's not slowing down at all. It's going along at its usual pace. But, if you look at the data, and if you look at, what some of the top people in computer science and engineering are saying, it's definitely slowing down. So what it means is that that free ride has essentially come to a halt, or is going to in the near future. And therefore, and this is happening at a time where, because of AI and machine learning and all that, the need for computation power is at an all-time high, right? So, so what? So let's see now what, right? So obviously, let me put it in terms of someone you may have all heard of. Hold on. Okay. So you may have all heard of Hennessy and Patterson, right? You've probably looked at their books on computer organization as well as architecture. So a couple of years back, 2017, I believe, Hennessy and Patterson were given the Turing Prize, which is the Nobel Prize equivalent for computer science and engineering, for the work they did in the RISC processors and all that. And around about that time, this is what they had to say, right? So you can look it up in IEEE Micro. David Patterson wrote this article with others. So basically, it makes it clear that we are in post Moore's law era, and it has kind of slowed down, and things are not progressing as they used to for a few years now, actually, right? And then he goes on to say that the next decade promises to be exciting for architectures, And if you look at the, because Moore's law itself is fading for ML and all that, you need more power. So there will be more interest in making current architectures more efficient. All right. And he goes on to say, if you read the article, that there's going to be a golden age of computer architecture, and that translates to, hardware implementation, hardware accelerators, chip design, things like that. Right? So that is kind of the reason that I'm interested in hardware implementation of algorithms, because the current architectures, they are not terribly efficient, microprocessors and all, and which is why you see companies like Google also turning to developing their own tensor processing units, Amazon developing their own Inferentia thing. So because, one wants efficiency, Moore's law is no longer going to give it to you. So there's more and more interest in. So from a computer science perspective, I would say hardware implementation of algorithms, right? You take the algorithm, directly implement it in hardware. From an ECE EE perspective, it would be, going ahead and doing advanced logic design. There are all sorts of interesting techniques that you can use to implement things more efficiently directly in hardware when you don't have to use software. So now what I'm going to do, so what I've been doing is, over the years, I've developed this framework. Okay, so let me introduce that. So this is something that people are realizing, that there's going to be more and more interest in hardware implementation of algorithms, and not everyone would be interested in or be an expert in doing very low level kind of design, which is the way that hardware is designed today. In fact, even the practitioners, right? So if you're an EC or EE and you are getting into chip design, so the designs today have billions of transistors, and so even for experts, tools are required which give a higher level of abstraction, so that the problem becomes more tractable, and you can do a better job of implementing your logic, right? So because of that, what has happened is there has been an interest in something called high-level synthesis, right? And there are a bunch of industry standards on that. So one had Verilog, so now we have System Verilog, and similar to their System C, and even using C, C++, you can describe logic. There are standards for that, and even MATLAB, right? So there has been an interest in all these things, and ever since I was a PhD student, people have been trying to develop this C program to hardware kind of thing, and so there are fundamental reasons why that is something that is not very effective. And in spite of there being these standard System Verilog, System C kind of languages available, if you look at Berkeley, right, for example, UC Berkeley, that's where Patterson is from, they have developed something called Chisel, right? So I would, you can look it up on the net. It's kind of interesting. So this is a logic design framework that's based on the language called Scala. Okay. So Scala, as you may have heard, runs on the JVM, Java Virtual Machine, and it's what is known as a object/functional language, right? It is somewhat object-oriented as well as somewhat functional. So why is it that in spite of these frameworks existing, Berkeley, obviously the smart people choose to develop this Chisel? So it's interesting. It's not, the logic is not all that obvious. So they have in fact got a link to a Stack Exchange page where they explain in detail what the motivations are, and I agree with quite a few of them. So you can go to chisel-lang.org, I think that's their URL. And the same applies to this framework that I have been developing. So this has been going on for the past around 10, 15 years. When I found the limitations of Verilog and system Verilog and all that. Um, so this is in some sense somewhat similar to Chisel, but it has its own ways of doing things. And some of them are inspired by functional programming languages, which is what I hope to introduce to you in this next half of this talk. And um, and there is a very comprehensive library of components that has been developed over a long time, and it has been properly tested out in various designs that are implemented and actually configured and have been running properly at reasonably high speeds. So this is a framework that we are planning to introduce to all of you in the workshop, and like I said, we plan to open source as well. So those of you who are interested in hardware would get a look at it from a couple of different points of view, right? So the first is that this will the very simplest, right? So okay, so the key thing is that it introduces you to a way of defining hardware that is turns out to be a lot more efficient, because using very compact syntax you can define very complex hardware, and you can change it. It's very flexible to change it, so you get essentially a high level of abstraction without losing control at the low level, right? So that's one of the key things this gives you. And if you're not interested in this higher order logic module or higher order logic block based thing that I'm going to talk about, you can still think of it as a way where you can quickly generate components of various different kinds. A reasonably comprehensive set of components are available that you can directly incorporate into whatever hardware development that you're doing using standard tools. So by the way, this also fits into the standard flow. You describe your logic using a somewhat different language, which is quite a lot more compact and a lot more pleasant to work in compared to Verilog or VHDL. But that generates standard Verilog that you can use for your downstream CAD tools. And in fact, even if you're not interested in hardware, this gives you some introduction to higher order functions. So this is inspired by functional programming languages. So one of the key things that they give, and it's somewhat difficult to appreciate, but it has a lot of impact, is what is known as higher order functions, right? So hopefully, if you're interested, only in software, it will give you some idea of that and inspire you to look at functional programming languages just from the point of view of pure software development as well. Right. So here, let me take a moment to kind of motivate what this is. Then I'll just get hands-on and run a few examples to give you a taste for what this sort of development looks like. But before that, let me introduce this notion of higher order functions, right? So basically, functional languages are such that so you've used functions in C and all that, right? So function is something that will take in some arguments, return a value, right? So first of all, the functions in functional programming languages are pure functions in the sense they can't change state. But the bigger sort of deal is that what does one mean by higher order functions? It is that a function can be passed as an argument to another function, and a function can return not only integers and lists and stuff. It can also return another function as its return value, right? So this may not sound like a big deal, but let me try to give you an intuition as to what's going on here. All right. So how many of you have heard of Y Combinator? Right. So Y Combinator is this thing that funds startups and has funded Airbnb and things like that. And it is started by this guy called Paul Graham, right? So he actually, became initially successful because he developed what was once upon a time called the Yahoo Store, right? So this was the Yahoo e-commerce platform, and Paul Graham developed it in Lisp, right? So he knows about functional programming. So this is, how he kind of gives the intuition behind it. So let's talk about another concept in programming languages. So you might have heard of design patterns, right, in Java and other languages. So especially if you're, into software development, design patterns are a big deal, right? So there's a factory pattern, there's a pattern for, various kinds of things. And in general, someone say who's developing something in Java, for example, they would get excited if they see, a whole bunch of patterns in their program, right? Because then they know that they're following, standard software development techniques. Now, so even if, a Java programmer sees the pattern repeating multiple times, he's happy or she's happy, right? But a functional program will get very concerned if he sees the same pattern occurring at many places in the program, because what a functional programmer will do, they'll kind of capture or encapsulate that pattern into a higher order function and then use that function in multiple places. Okay, so it may not be clear what that means, so let me try to give you a sort of concrete idea as to what I mean by that, right? So here, let me get into the hardware part of things. So let me get started by, let's take a very simple thing. So what you see on your screens right now, hopefully you can see this. Let me see if I increase its size. Okay. So what you see on your screens is, couple of modules there. So the first module, HA, is a half adder. Second module, FA, is a full adder. And then below that, you have one half adder and three full adders combined together in ripple carry form. And that module you see, here, FA4, that is a 4-bit ripple carry adder. That's all, right? So I believe that most, if not all of you, have done digital design computer organization, or CODD, that's as it's known in ECE, and probably a similar course in EE, right? So you all, I believe, know what a full adder is and how you can construct a ripple carry adder. So, this you can easily do. This is just a 4-bit adder. So now suppose you had to design a 8-bit or 16-bit adder, right? How would you do it, right? So you will go ahead and, instantiate the full adder 8 or 16 times more, right? Somewhat tedious, but it can be done. How about, a 32-bit or a 64-bit or a 128-bit adder, right? So that's where things start getting tedious, where you have to manually kind of do this. So this is where I would like to introduce you to, okay, so we come to this there, hold on to this, right? So I'll come back to the full adder. And so the challenge, like I just mentioned, is, if you want to make a 64-bit full adder, you need 64 lines of instantiations of the full adder, right? So that is going to be a challenge. So how do we deal with that? I'll come to that. But before that, I'd like to start with a simpler example, wherein we take an AND gate, okay? Pretty much the simplest possible here. So what I'm going to do is, so this will be, simple demonstration of the tool also. So there's already a component for a 2-input AND gate that is defined, that is called gate underscore AND2. And so if I pass this component to this function called out ver, out underscore ver, let me call it out ver for short, and let's see, right? So when I press enter there, it generated the module, Verilog module for it to input AND gate, right? So you've all probably seen things like this and you should be quite familiar with this, right? So now here's my question to you, right? How about if I need a 3-input AND gate, right? So like I was talking before about, using that in the Ripple carry adder, you can instantiate, 2 AND gates and be done with it, right? How about if I need a 37 input AND gate, right? So that's where things get tedious, right? So what can one do, right? So that is where, the higher order function business comes into the picture, right? So let's see if I can show it to you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this higher order function or module called bintree, right? And I'm going to pass to it a gate and 2, and I'm going to say that I require a 4-input AND gate. Okay, let's see if this works. It doesn't. Okay, so hold on, let me see what's going on here. Okay, I think I used the wrong name for that. There's no underscore there. It's just bintree. Okay, so let's see what we get. Right, so this is what has been generated. Okay, so if you look at the function and2 underscore 2 underscore 2, so that is going to take 4 inputs and give 1 output. And inside this, it instantiates a 2-input AND gate and 2 other modules that in turn have 2-input AND gates. So essentially, this gives you a 4-input AND gate, right? So how did this happen? Okay, so this happened because this bintree that you see here, this is a higher order module or a function to which I pass the gate and 2 as an argument, and I also pass the number 4 as an argument. And what did it do? So basically what this bintree function does is it will create a binary tree which has whose number of leaf nodes is equal to the number that you specify, right? So what it did is it created a binary tree with 4 leaf nodes, right? So the number of leaf nodes is 4. And if you recall your binary tree structure, that means the non-leaf or internal nodes is 3, right? And so leaf nodes, fine. There are 4 leaf nodes. Those form the inputs of the logic that will be created. And then what this bintree function does is it will take that gate and 2 and put it at each of the non-leaf positions in that binary tree, right? So there are 3 non-leaf positions in a binary tree with 4 leaf nodes, right? So it will put that and 2 gate in all those 3 positions, and whatever structure is there, it will return that, and that outward function will convert into Verilog, and this is what we get. Okay, and it is general purpose, so it can create a binary tree with arbitrary number of leaves, right? So here if I want, I can specify 128, so it will create a binary tree with 128 leaves, and it will position an and2 gate in each of the non-leaf positions, and when I do that, this is what I get, right? So this is Verilog that has been generated that will implement a 128 input AND gate, right? So if you look at this module, right? So this is, taking in 128 inputs here, right? So this is a 128 input AND gate, all right? So, and, right, so it is, like I said, in higher order function, which is taking this AND2 as an input. So it's not necessary that, I can generate only AND gates of whatever sizes. I replace that AND2 with OR2 here, and I can generate a 128-bit OR2, right? And I'm not restricted to, having this for powers of 2. I can put in any number here, and it will generate, so now it has generated 251 input OR gate. Okay. And I don't have to be restricted to this. I can make an XOR gate, NOR gate. So now I've generated 251 input XOR gate. All right. So the point here is, first of all, you are kind of independent of the number of inputs you have. Okay. So, if you want a multi-input gate, that's the kind of advantage of having a higher order function. So these are called combinators if you get into, the functional programming language jargon. So this combinator can take, so basically, let's look at it from the pattern point of view. So if this was not there, one would be, manually instantiating stuff, or if one uses fancier system Verilog constructs, you can use things like generate, and there's some limited for loops and all that. And you would still be doing it separately for different gates, right? You cannot pass a Verilog module as an argument to another Verilog module, correct? That's a fundamental limitation that Verilog and languages like that have. And that is the reason that one takes the trouble of designing something like Flow. Okay. So now that you can pass modules as arguments to others, and they can return modules as return values, you can kind of abstract out this pattern that occurs in so many places, right? So essentially, wherever you're doing gates that take more than 2 inputs, this pattern would be occurring. And what we have done here is, rather than have that pattern occurring all over the code, and for you to actually manually by hand, kind of write the code specifying that pattern, we have extracted that pattern out and captured that in this bin tree function so that it can be used whenever and wherever it is required. All right. So that is the essence of, this higher order notion, and also why this makes your, logic design and specification so much faster and pleasant to use, right? So this bin tree is, one example of a combinator. So any questions about this? You can ask, or maybe, otherwise you can ask at the end. But I would, if there are any issues in understanding, right? Issues in understanding what I'm explaining, then please go ahead and ask. Otherwise, we can plan on having a discussion at the end. All right. So this is one combinator. Now let's get back to what I was talking about with the adder, correct? So like I was saying, 64-bit adder would be painful because you have to instantiate it 64 times. So what can be done, right? So let us see, let's look at an adder sort of pictorially, right? So that should give us some idea of what is the, sort of structure that is involved here, right? So I hope you can see this figure here, right? So you've probably all studied this in your DDC or equivalent courses. So this is a ripple carry adder where for the MSB bit we are using a half adder, and for the subsequent bits we are using full adder, right? And so you got the bits A0, B0 to A3, B3 going in, the sum outputs S0 to S3 coming out, and C4 is the carry, right? So if we have to make a combinator that kind of makes this for us, so obviously one thing we'll need is the size of the adder, right? And we'll need to specify as arguments the modules, right? So at the MSB especially, you need a separate module. For the remaining bits, you need a separate module, right? So you'll have to specify two logic modules that will have to be instantiated. And also we will need to form internal connections, right? So basically the C out of one module would need to be connected to the C in or carry in input of the next module, right? So those are the things that a combinator that does this would need to do, right? So how does one do that, right? So for that, what we have is, let's see, we have a combinator called chain, all right? Let me see how this will work. So we'll have out VR, and then we have this combinator called chain, and to this as inputs, what do we give? Let's see, I'll have to check that, hold on. Right, so chain will take okay, right? So like I said, it will take in a full adder as in, so full adder module I showed you has already been defined, right? Similarly, a half adder module has been defined, right? And then I think it'll, so there is an empty argument which I'll come to later, right? Then it will take in, like I said, you can instantiate a number of these modules, but the C in, C out connectivity has to be done, right? So that you specify as a separate argument here. So we specify C in input is going to be connected to C out output, right? So between successive modules. So exactly how this works, it's perfectly fine if you don't understand it right now, but at least you know that this is the information that has to be given to it, and this is the manner in which that information is provided. And finally, like I said, we have to specify the size of the ripple carry adder that we want. Let me say here 4, right? 4 bits. Let's see if this works, and that's what we get, right? So we have the module full adder, we have the module half adder, and then we have this, this is the module that is generated. So this will take in, a 4-bit input I0, a 4-bit input I1, and it will generate a 4-bit output sum, and it will generate a 1-bit output C out. All right. So this is how using this combinator, right? So this chain combinator has absolutely no idea about ripple carry adders. Okay. And we have kind of incorporated that information about a ripple carry adder and composed that with a full adder and half adder in just this one line, including specifying how big of an adder that we want, right? So now here so the way it works is that, and this is sort of recursive. So the full adder of 4-bit size will instantiate one full adder and a full adder of 3 bits in size, and so on, right? So if I go ahead and make a, I mentioned 128-bit. So again, it's not anything to do with powers of 2. I can specify 127 here, right? So if I do that, it will generate a 127-bit full adder for me, right? And so now, because we have taken the trouble of designing this higher order combinator, we are not restricted just to designing a ripple carry adder, right? So we have kind of captured that pattern. And if you recall your DDCO, right? So there are other similar structures, right? So for example, let's see. So, this is a 4-bit incrementer, right? So where you don't want the entire sum, you are given a value and you just want to increment it by 1. Then you can replace essentially the full adders by half adders, and this is the structure you get, right? So to generate it here, we don't have to, create another chain combinator. All we have to do is we have to specify that not only is the LSB component a half adder, but the remaining components are also half adders, right? And if I specify this, what I've generated is a 127-bit incrementer logic. All right. So if you look at this, let's see. Right. So if I go all the way up to the top here, I will see this component which has got 127-bit input, right? So, well, this is half full adder, sorry. It's below. Hold on. Why is it generated? Sorry, this had, so I had to make this half adder, right? So when I do that, it has generated this, where if I go to the top level here, I've got this half adder component, and so it's taking in two inputs of say I0 and I1 both, right? Okay. Yeah, it'll take in two inputs. Okay. So that is something that has to be dealt with, right? So there's a minor issue here. Well, it's a bug actually, but it's only in the top line. So if you just delete that, then well, hold on. Hold on. Let me kind of look at the library here, which should clarify things. Why would it take in two components? Okay, so let me give you another example. Let's see. Okay, so let's take this example here, right? So I have got this component called inc DFR prime, all right? So there's an issue with this, there's a slight issue with this half adder example that I gave. So let me give you an example that I know works. So let's move on to that. Right, so this is your standard incrementing counter, correct? So this again you've studied in something like DDCO, where, so what does each stage look like, right? So if you look at each stage, the XOR gate and the AND gate on the top essentially is a half adder, and below that you have this D flip-flop, right? So that's what you have in each stage, right? So here what you can do, so you can create one stage of that kind, right? So that is what has been done over here. Right, so there's a module that has been created that's called IncDFR prime, right? So let's take a look at what that module contains. Right, so that module is something like this. Okay, so this module, that is generated here, right? As you can see, like I just said, it contains essentially one counter stage, in the sense it contains one half adder and one D flip flop, right? And the remaining modules are the ones that are instantiated inside this. So it has generated all the dependent modules as well. Okay. And for the very first position, you need a slightly different module that is called, I believe, IncDFR prime 0, right? So here, it's slightly different in the sense that basically the only difference is, there's a renaming. So instead of saying CN, you say increment here, right? Right. So this modules one defines, right? And then what can one do? Then we can use the a chain.
Hello? Sidhu sir, I don't think we can hear you.
Guys, please don't leave. Sir's just having some connection issues. He should be back like really soon.
Right. Sorry about that. Got disconnected. Thanks for letting me know, Madhav. So hope I'm audible now. Let me present again.
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Thanks. Okay. So hope the screen is visible.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So basically what I was explaining was, that if I do this chain combinator, right? And I pass this inc DFR prime and inc DFR prime 0 modules as the arguments to that, and then C in C out as usual. And if I want a 4-bit counter, let's say 4, then I can generate a 4-bit counter here. All right. So let's see. So this is the module that got generated, and if you look at it, there's a problem with this, right? And what is the problem? So what has happened is, okay, so if you look at a counter, it only needs a single input called count, correct? And if you look at, the diagram here, that is what is the case. It just has a single input count other than clock and reset, of course. All right. So here that count input is there, clock and reset is also there, but because of the way the combinator functions, since each inc DFR has a separate clock reset, it has kind of taken that as being separate inputs, and it has made clock and reset into 4-bit vectors, which are to be input here, which is something that we don't want, right? So difference compared to the earlier things is that clock and reset, although they're inputs for each module, they need to be connected together, right? Unlike the full adder inputs that we had for ripple carry, which needed to be separate, right? For I0, I1, I2 and all that. Here they need to be connected together, right? And that is what this argument that I said I'll talk about later is for, right? So here, whatever input
Hello? Sir, I don't think you're audible. Sir, I think you got disconnected right now.
Right. So maybe this connection is a bit flaky, so I'll just quickly hang up and connect from an internet connection. Just hold on.
Sure, sir.
Yeah, audible now?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, sir.
And is the screen visible?
Not yet, sir. Yes, sir. Now it's
Yes,
visible.
sir. Visible now.
Okay, thanks.
So,
Right. So, yeah. So, so this is a chain combinator, which, if you start designing logic, in our experience, it gets used at a whole bunch of places, right? And just to give you an idea, Um, let's see. So how much time do I have? I'm running over time, I think.
Sir, till you have till 1 p.m. is fine.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
After this, we'll
So
have
I'll
like
wrap.
another meeting.
I understand. So let me wrap it up in the next few minutes. Um, so, and not only this, we have got combinators for parallel prefix, right? So you've studied parallel prefix also, right? So let me quickly see if I can show that to you. And there are various other combinators that are available. And so let's see if parallel prefix I had somewhere. Um, right, so let's try this. So there's a combinator called parallel prefix, and if you've done DDCO the way I teach it, so first you learn parallel prefix for a simple gate or something like that, right? So let's try 16 bits here. So I think it'll take a while for 16 bits, but so this will give, sorry, this is power of 2, so it will generate 2 raised to 16. So I think I have to give 4 here, right? So if I do that, it will generate a 16 input. So this logic that is generated here is exactly the same as the logic that you see on the slide, all right? And you can replace that, AND gate with the full adder structure, so you can generate a parallel prefix full adder, and there are various other structures, right? So we have a library of components here, right? So we've got, for example, FIFOs here, okay? So these are queues that are commonly used. So the general purpose queue for any number of uh, any size and any bit width, and it has a nice compact representation. Then you might have done what are known as barrel shifters, right? So I had taught those also, right? So if you augment a barrel shifter, you get a rotator, right? So you cannot just shift, but you can rotate, okay? So here you will see that, a rotation logic circuit. Let's see if I can find it. Where is it? Um, Maybe it's here. Yeah. So, these 3 lines here and these 3 lines here, together 6 lines here, specify, barrel shifter essentially of arbitrary size, right? And this turns out to be useful not only for these small kind of components. We have actually gone ahead and implemented, um, something as complex as this systolic matrix multiplier, where each of the processing elements you see here contains a multiplier and an accumulator for 32-bit integers or floating point single precision. And we have done it for 16 bits, 16 cross 16, that's 256 P's. And we've got it up and running at 400 megahertz. So it gives you a few hundred gigaflops. And let me just quickly show you, if I can, the code that actually implements that. Right, so that is, so just to give you an idea of how so the processing element is defined here, right? So this is called a PE. Then we use the chain combinator to construct one row of P's. Then we use another nested the so with a reasonably compact this thing, you can generate the matrix multiplier array, right? So the fact that you can do it in such a compact this thing, and you have flexibility and control at the very lowest levels, is something that we have found to be quite useful. There are a whole bunch of other components that are also available. And so hopefully this has given you some taste for what higher order functions can do for you, how you can kind of capture their pattern into one higher order function, which is useful not only for hardware but for software also. In fact, this has been inspired by the way things are done in software and functional programming, right? And so if you're interested, we are having this workshop starting this coming Tuesday. So it's already a bit late, but if you're interested, I would request you to go to this link and register in case you're interested. And Hack Club anyway, keeps happening, holding these events for um, related to hardware, and we will be planning to open source this. And in case you're not too interested, you can always wait for the open source version to come out. And I'm sorry I didn't have the Pesu OS logo on these slides. I realized it a bit too late. Otherwise, I wanted to put that also. Fine, thank you. So with that, I come to the end of my talk. So hope you found it somewhat useful. And this notion of higher order functions is something that I urge all of you to look into, whether it's in the context of hardware or software. I think this will help out a lot in your technical careers. Fine. Thank you for attending. Thanks for having me. And if there are any questions, I'll go ahead and take them now.
Thank you so much for that. Your work is so impressive. And when I think about the times I spent last sem, like instantiating all those modules, God, I just wish this framework was available that time. But yeah, I'm sure I speak for all of us when I say that we're incredibly excited for you to open this up to open source.
Oh, great. Thank you. Great that, I was able to convey, these problems that it solves. Um, so yeah, so one goes through that, process where one finds how painful it is to do the instantiations. So, which is one reason I make my students do that in DDCU, at least initially, so that, they learn at least how to do that. And well, at least in DDCU, it's not so much of instantiations required there. But yes, if you've done other projects where you're restricted to using standard Verilog or even something like system Verilog, there would be issues because things get really painful, right? So those kind of things, this helps avoid. And it's not like you have to kind of explicitly write things for multi-input AND gate, multi-input OR gate. It kind of abstracts over all of that. So that's one of the key things that this framework provides that quite a few others do not.
Yes, sir. And it's so cool that you've been working on it for 15 years. Wow.
Yes. So, I didn't want to do it myself. And I thought, if something else is there, because, it's a pain if you start developing something, then you have to maintain it. But the urge to kind of get started with it was so strong. And, at that time, Chisel and all didn't exist.
Right.
And so I just went ahead and did it. And, it's like as time went by, depending on whatever project I was working on, I kept adding things to it. So now it's reached a reasonably mature level. And I think it'll be useful to the students here. So, with our interest in hardware acceleration and other things. So that's why we are kind of now making it available to students.
It
So,
definitely
as a
will
future
be.
hardware aspirant myself, do you have any idea how long will it take to be open source? Because to be honest, I really want to contribute to it.
Okay, so I think first you should kind of go ahead and you will be given access to this in the workshop. Okay, so we might either put a version of this on GitHub and ask you to do that, or what you're planning to do is put a version of this into a VM, and that VM will share with all of you, right? So in that sense, there will be a limited open sourcing of this in the workshop itself, right? And there we'll teach you how to kind of use it. and for your own designs. And once you get comfortable with that, you can, you're welcome to start contributing. And, that's what some students of mine have been doing. So when you're developing this matrix multiplier, they've made all sorts of contributions to that. And then, when we get into things like we need high speed queues and stuff, then, there are other students who are here who have worked on, making high speed counters for this. And so we essentially welcome students to, kind of make it more sophisticated and, have a larger variety of components and combinators and all that. So I suggest, right now the quickest way would be to attend the workshop. And you know there would be so I cannot say right now what the time frame would be, but not too long. So in a reasonably short time, we'll just put it on GitHub for everyone to access. But yeah, so limited access will be given in the workshop itself.
Yes, sir. I am attending the workshop and I would love to use it soon. And
Oh,
let me
great.
know when it
Sounds
comes
good.
on GitHub. Thank you.
And sir, is the workshop online or is it in person?
Well, we thought about making it online, but we wanted to have interaction with the attendees. So we have, and since students are coming to campus anyway, we have decided to make this workshop offline, right?
Okay,
And
thank you.
Sorry,
That makes sense, yeah.
Ishita, you're saying something?
No, sir. I just said that I agree. That makes sense. That you'd want interaction, and for it to be in college,
So
where anyway, sure.
yes,
College, yeah.
right. So, it's the personal interaction that helps when you're teaching something new. And so, in fact, what we have done is we had a response that was greater than what we expected. So, we have bifurcated this into two batches. So, it'll be a bit more work for us, but we are still kind of going the online way. And so, we will be doing this in two batches, and we will, invite you all to one of the seminar halls. And we'll be using about 50% of the capacity of the seminar hall so that, proper social distancing can be maintained. And yeah, so we'll be going ahead and doing it offline.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Sure.
Are there any more questions? Feel free to.
So I hear Madhav is, sorry, go ahead.
No, sir. I was just saying that if there's any more questions, like they can unmute and ask you.
Yeah, please go ahead, right? You don't have to use the chat window. You can just unmute and ask. So, are there, by the way, any Haskell developers here? Madhav mentions that there are quite a few.
So I
So,
don't think he meant
that
here.
would
He
be
meant
great.
as in the PS open source community.
Right. So, okay. So they might not be attending this, but yeah, so that is good to know. So we have some development in Haskell and we have some development in the Scheme functional programming language as well, right? So if there are any who want to contribute at that level, that would also be welcome.
Yes, sir. As Madhav said in the chat window, I do know a few functional programming languages. I'm not too familiar with Haskell, but I've worked with Scheme before, more like particularly in Racket. So yeah, that's
Okay,
why this
all right.
project does look very interesting to me. I like how it's very composable, and so
Yes,
yeah, I
exactly.
look forward to being able to contribute to this.
Oh, sounds good. So we are actually using the Guile version of Scheme, right? But if you're familiar with Racket, then there's probably not much difference. So we are actively developing, the using Guile Scheme. We are working on developing this framework further. So if you have any interest, please feel free to get in touch with me. So you know, there are quite a few different things that we could work on depending on your interest. So, by the way, if you use Scheme, have you used SICP? Atharva?
Yes, I've actually like gone through like the first 3 units. Not really done all the exercises, but yeah.
Okay. So let me suggest to all of you, in fact, there's a book which is, um, you know, meant, so it talks about Scheme, but which is a functional programming language. But this is something that even if you're not going to use functional language, is kind of mind expanding in the way you think about how computation should be structured, right? It's called Structure and Interpretation of Computer Programs. There should be an S at the end there. So this by a couple of MIT professors, and a few years back, the freshmen at MIT, they would already have reasonable experience in C, Java, and all that. So they were introduced to computation in the very first course at MIT using this book, right? And the introduction was in terms of scheme. So even if you're not interested in hardware, even if you're not interested in functional programming, I would urge you to check this book out. And this is available freely on the web. You can go to the MIT Press website and you can, get this book there.
All right, Ishita, I think we can prepare for like the last session for the open hardware meetup.
Okay, sure. So thank you so much for joining us again.
Oh, thanks.
Okay.
Good to be here, and happy to see that, uh, audience was able to appreciate the advantages of, the framework.
Yes, sir, definitely.
So any book suggestions for the hardware interested one?
Hardware interested, well, the standard book is these days, you can look at Harris and Harris, right? So that is a book that does a reasonably good job of starting with bits and gates and going all the way to a microprocessor development. And he covers all the, what I would consider all the important components, topics in a sensible manner with the required amount of depth, um, and goes all the way to a microprocessor. So there's a lot of HDL stuff in that, which probably can be skipped, but otherwise that would be a pretty good book to get started with, right? And then once you get specialized and you want to get into high speed or various other techniques, then there are, other books that one can look at, right? So again, it would depend on your specialization, right? So for example, one of the things that is really cool about doing things in hardware is, so for example, if you've done addition, right, triple carries linear time, you can use parallel prefix, that's logarithmic time. But you get these sign digit schemes in hardware which can compute addition of two numbers of any size in constant time, right? um, so that, and so for example, if you want to trigonometric operations, right, so doing sine and cos might sound so complex, but you can do it just using shifts and adds in hardware, right? So if you're interested in, hardware implementation of arithmetic, then there's a book by Ersegovec and Lang, right? So this is a fairly rigorous book, but it will go into all the sort of gory depths that are required for you to properly implement these really, really, very fast components that allow you to do arithmetic, extremely fast, right? So if you're interested in those kind of things, then this is the book to look at.
Okay, so thank you.
Sure.
Okay, thank you so much, sir.
Fine.
So,
Yeah.
our next speaker is.
Thanks. Yeah, go ahead. So
No,
I just wanted to thank you all
no,
for
I'm so
arranging
sorry.
this.
Please
Yeah.
continue.
That's all. So thanks, Ishita and